Tell me a little bit about yourself. How long have you lived here? How old are you? Your full name?
My full name is Catherine Ann. Maiden name was Chavez. And I've been heirs since 1980.
Okay.
But I got a divorce after 29 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he came home one day and said, we need to go our separate ways. I am 73 years old.
Okay.
So I'm not a spring chicken by no means.
That is Kathy Ayers. I met her in Las Vegas. I was actually attending a meeting of a group that helps people with housing problems.
Leanne Caldwell covers politics for The Post. She has been looking into why rent is so high for so many people like Kathy Ayers. Kathy has actually struggled with housing for a long time. She told Leanne that after her divorce 20 years ago, she was in a really tough spot financially. She lost her job that same year. Since then, there have been times where she didn't have a great place to live.
So where are you living now?
Right now, I'm in a studio that belongs to a girl that I met at a shelter. I've lived in shelters. I've lived out in the streets. And at 73 years old,
wow,
I don't need to be doing this.
She lives in a studio apartment with 2 other people. She's lived there for the past nearly 4 years. And she and another person share a twin bed. And the third person sleeps on a cot.
What led Leanne to Kathy was something that she kept hearing in the halls of the Capitol. Lawmakers kept telling her that their constituents were having a really hard time with rising housing costs. And Leanne was intrigued.
And so finally, because it's a presidential election year, I was looking at places in battleground states that were having housing issues. Most of them are, but Las Vegas is one of the worst.
Leanne grew up in Vegas, so she knows it pretty well. Vegas is super diverse. It's home to a lot of blue-collar workers, and it's also a city of extremes. Leanne says that when the U.S. economy is doing well and people are spending money on travel and entertainment, Vegas does well. But when the economy is doing worse, Vegas really suffers. And it turns out that housing is one of the biggest ways that people feel those fluctuations.
We see the polling all the time, right? That the economy is either the top or second issue that is most important to voters, economy/inflation. But those are also the topics that pollsters give people, economy and inflation and a whole list of other things like immigration, abortion, etc. But those are the choices that people have to choose from. And so I really became interested in if the issue of housing is actually playing in to some of these polling numbers when people say that the economy is tough or they're concerned about it or inflation is a problem. And what I found is it is. If you can't afford or if you're struggling to pay for your rent or sometimes your mortgage every month, it makes everything else hard to do. Makes food at the grocery store feel more extreme when you're paying 50% of your income in rent. So it really kind of impacts everything. And so I really wanted to dive into that and found that it is definitely something that's on people's minds politically.
From the newsroom of The Washington Post, this is Post Reports. I'm Martine Powers. It's Monday, June 10th. Today, how housing could be the sleeper issue of the presidential election. Leanne spoke with my co-host, Elahe Izadi. I'll let her take it from here.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Catherine Ayers' housing situation and how her housing costs, how she's trying to balance that with her income? Because I think your conversation with her might tell us a little bit more about just the struggles people are facing.
Yeah, she is on a fixed income. She's 73 years old. She's not working right now, so she gets Social Security.
So you're on a fixed income.
I'm on a fixed income.
And that does not cover the cost of an apartment.
No, I get $1,451 a month. That's what I have on.
Mm-hmm.
And you go to find a place. They want 3 months of your rent.
I've heard this, yes.
As a deposit.
The median rent in Las Vegas right now is more than she brings home. It's about $1,480 a month. And so she is really struggling to find a place to live. Mm-hmm. She is searching to see if there's anything available, and she hasn't found anything yet.
Let's be realistic. Mm-hmm. People can't afford housing, and it's just bad.
And how typical is Catherine's situation for the rest of Nevada? What does the housing situation look like across the state?
So housing has increasingly become a problem in Las Vegas, in the state. The reasons are multiple. It actually started after the Great Recession in 2008. Las Vegas was hit so hard back then.
The sign says Fabulous Las Vegas, but it's not so fabulous these days. Sin City's economy was built on gaming and tourism, but in the recession, that hand was a bust.
Foreclosure rates were extremely high, and the city never recovered. And then you fast forward into the pandemic, where building stopped again. But people continued to move to Las Vegas because rents are much cheaper than they are in California. Mm-hmm. And so now in a post-pandemic world, you have not nearly enough housing for people to live. And so something that's very unique to Las Vegas and the state of Nevada is this issue of federal lands. Nevada is pretty much completely federal lands. And so Las Vegas cannot expand anymore. It is suburban sprawl, but it cannot expand anymore because it has hit the end until the federal government owns the rest of the land around it.
So it's like an island in some ways surrounded by federal land.
It is absolutely an island surrounded by federal land. And so local officials, especially Republicans, are saying that the federal government needs to release federal lands to allow them to build housing. And so that normal economics 101, supply and demand, when there's not enough supply and the demand is high, prices rise. And so over the past 4 years, since in the pandemic, prices increased 36% for rent in Las Vegas. It went down slightly, but it's still now 30% higher than it was 4 years ago. And then when you carry that on top of high interest rates for people who want to buy,
right.
People can't afford to buy, so they are continuing to rent if they wanted to be a home buyer, which is also driving up demand for rental units. The National Low-Income Housing Coalition, they keep track of this, and there's about a 78,000 unit housing shortage in Las Vegas alone. Mm-hmm. That doesn't just mean 78,000 people need housing. They count that for units for 4. So one unit would be 4 people. And so that's over 300,000 people who are in need of housing. Not necessarily that they're all on the streets, but it's just when there's not enough supply, prices just increase. And so they can't keep up. They can't keep up with the demand.
So Leanne, zooming out from Nevada, I'm curious what the rest of the country looks like. Where in the country do we see cost of housing particularly high? Where has home ownership dropped? Where are the places in the country that are really feeling the pinch? And what's the overlap here when we're thinking about 2024 and the campaign cycle and these important battleground states?
Yeah, so housing costs have increased in many places around the country. Actually, a lot of them are cities. And I looked specifically at the battleground states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, North Carolina, too. What I found is that housing ownership overall in all of those states have decreased since the pandemic. And then I looked also at Black home ownership, because this economy has also disproportionately impacted young people, Black people, Hispanic people, that Black home ownership has also decreased in most places greater than levels of white home ownership. And in the battleground states, that has been true for all except for one. And the one exception is Wisconsin. And for the rest, Black homeownership rates have decreased greater than white homeownership rates have decreased. And of course, Black people is a constituency that President Biden is really struggling with right now.
Leanna, I want to dig more into the reasons and the factors driving this housing crisis across the country. So when we're thinking about the rest of the country, can you talk me through what's driving the housing crisis in aggregate? Is it pretty much the same situation as what you saw in Nevada?
It's similar. Of course, every city and every state has their own issues, but it is a lot of the same things. It comes down to housing supply, like I mentioned. I mean, it's kind of straight economics. And when you talk to the Biden administration, they also believe that supply is the biggest challenge. But then there's some other issues, too. There's this issue that is also impacting Las Vegas greatly, and that is that these Wall Street-backed firms are coming in and buying up single-family homes. They are corporate landowners, homeowners who are sometimes putting the houses on the market to rent. Sometimes they are just holding them until they can inflate prices in the neighborhood to get more money in the long run. And so that is something that is really challenging for Las Vegas, but that's also happening around the country. Another thing is that pandemic-era policies are ending. During the COVID pandemic, the Biden administration put in an eviction moratorium.
The Biden administration has extended the nationwide ban on evictions for another month. The CDC put the eviction moratorium in place last year to help those unable to pay rent during the coronavirus pandemic.
What they also did is to make sure that landlords weren't losing out on money, because sometimes there's, mom and pop landlords. They're not always corporate landlords. These people also have to pay their bills. There was a rental assistance program. And so now that the programs are ending or they have less money, now people are also being evicted from their homes if they can't keep up with their rent.
It's interesting we're just talking about this housing situation, and it just makes me think about how if you have really expensive housing costs, even if you get this message that, actually, the economy is doing really, really great, if you're spending more than half of your paycheck or you just can't afford housing, it really doesn't matter what messaging you're getting about how the economy is doing in aggregate. Is this something that came up for you?
Yeah, it absolutely did. There's another woman that I talked to, Dee Carter. She's 26 years old. She has a job, a good job in banking. She has a fluctuating income, but makes between $50,000 to $70,000 a year, which is really good money for a 26-year-old. And she was living in a place for $1,500 a month is what she was paying for her one-bedroom apartment. But what happened, which is like what happened with so many people in Las Vegas, is that the landlord increased rents. Hers increased more than 25% to $2,100 a month.
They're like, we're going up on the price. And I was like, but you guys aren't doing anything. They're like, well, it's the economy. It's inflation. It's whatever. And I was like, that's ridiculous. I'm like, I love this place. It was my first place, but I'm not doing that.
She moved in with a friend, lived on the couch for a couple months while she found a new place to live. She finally did something that was a little bit cheaper, but still now she's paying, depending on how much she brings home that month, up to 50% of her income goes to rent, which is a lot. The industry standard is when you go to buy a house or rent an apartment, it's supposed to be 30% of your income is supposed to go to your rent or your mortgage. But now with rent so high, it's really pricing people out. And this woman that I talked to, Dee Carter, she says that it's really having an impact on the rest of her life. She walks in to Target, she said, and she noticed prices have gone up a little bit.
Even like toiletry products, like basic necessities, pads, deodorant, lotion, like even the basic stuff.
And that is really stressful because not only is she paying a higher percentage of her income in rent because rental prices have gone up, but now when she goes to the grocery store, her food and her cosmetics and the things that she needs are also more expensive. And every dollar that something more costs matters.
After the break, we'll hear about what power the president has to help with the pain of housing costs. We'll be right back.
You know, Leanne, as we're talking about housing, I'm struck that I think a lot of people tend to think of housing as a more regional or local issue. You know, you might live in a particular city or area and think, oh gosh, the cost of housing in, New York or San Francisco or wherever is just so much. And maybe not thinking about it as a national issue. But now I want to turn to the policy here because I am curious, what can the president or federal government do to address the housing crisis? What policies could they enact? How much of this is really about federal policy and the way that the economy is overseen in any way or shape or form by the president?
So I'm so glad you brought that up because housing is so much a local issue. It is a state issue. It's a county issue, local zoning issue. It absolutely is a local issue. But it can also be a federal issue, too. And in this era of national politics, everything is federalized and everything is nationalized, and people blame the president, people blame Congress. One of the people I spoke to was Congressman Stephen Horsford.
When people talk about the economy here in Nevada, the number one issue within the economy is housing. The rent, I agree with my constituents, the rent is too damn high.
He is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus here in Congress. He represents North Las Vegas, and he is seeing a lot of suffering in his district around the issue of housing. And he says that he has been imploring the president and Vice President Harris to make the issue of housing front and center of the campaign.
I asked the president, I asked the vice president, I talked to the administration, I said, you need to center the issue of housing from the standpoint of this is what people experience every single month.
He says that this is an issue that will speak to voters. This is an issue that will speak to Black voters, which he has a high percentage of Black voters in his district. And he begged the president to come to Las Vegas. And so the president did. He listened.
We're fortunate to have great partners in Congress here today who are helping make these dreams possible. Representative Stephen Horsford, a great leader of the 4th District and chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, who works every single day to reduce housing costs and close the racial wealth gap, which is happening. Representative Susie Lee.
So on his first swing state tour in March after the State of the Union, Biden went to Las Vegas and had an entire event around the issue of housing.
Hundreds of first-time home buyers be able to make a down payment. You invested more in building and renovating affordable homes than almost any other part of the country, any state in the country. For example, here in Clark County, nearly 1,000 brand new affordable units for seniors are under construction today as a result. 8,000 homes total for families, seniors, and veterans.
President Biden also has a multi-part, multi-page plan to address this issue. He laid out parts of it in his State of the Union. He proposes $258 billion to address housing in two ways. There's the cost, and so he has proposed incentives for first-time home buyers to incentivize people buying a home, like a $10,000 reimbursement for first-time home buyers to help with down payments and offsetting high mortgage rates, mortgage interest rates. So there's components on that side. And then he has incentives to incentivize builders to build. There are tax credits for builders to build more homes because, like I said, he believes that it is a supply problem.
So that's some of what President Biden has proposed doing. I am curious how that compares to what former President Donald Trump, who is running for president, obviously, as a Republican on that ticket, what his plan or proposals are on housing. Has he talked about it? How would you compare that to what Biden is putting forward?
It's completely different. Trump doesn't really have a housing plan. The Trump housing plan is to combat inflation, and then that will reduce housing costs eventually. And combating inflation, they say, by reining in government spending to rein in inflation, which they say will reduce housing costs.
And inflation is a big part of this, but as we've talked about, it's not everything that's created this mix of a situation right now.
Totally. Inflation is a big part. It absolutely is. But they think that a market correction and a hands-off approach is what will fix the situation. On the campaign trail, Donald Trump does talk about housing sometimes, but it's in the purview of, he says that President Biden is going to kill the suburbs. He's going to kill the suburban way of life.
The Democrats in D.C. have been and want to, at a much higher level, abolish our beautiful and successful suburbs by placing far-left Washington bureaucrats in charge of local zoning decisions. Your home will go down in value and crime rates will rapidly rise.
So he's coming from a place of fear-mongering that he is trying to take away suburbia with beautifully paved streets and clean-cut grass and individual single-family homes. He says he will protect the suburbs. What he is talking about is that President Biden has proposed incentivizing local communities, and this is where the localities come into play, incentivizing localities to change their zoning laws to allow more diverse ways of building in suburban areas. So not just single family homes, multifamily units, small apartment complexes, things like that, to increase supply. Because a lot of the challenge is some of these zoning laws that don't allow more dense building in suburbs. And some believe that that is prohibiting increase of housing supply.
So, Leanne, I am curious, the people you met in Nevada, when they were thinking about their personal circumstances and how much housing was costing them, did they talk about politicians? Did they talk about 2024 and how big of an issue this was for them at the ballot box, if they were even going to go to the ballot box, whether this was motivating them? Because I am just thinking about how a lot of people do think of this as a local issue. Are they blaming the president? Are they hoping for a change? Do they like some of the assistance that they've gotten? What did you hear from them?
Yeah, this is something that is on people's minds for sure. The woman, Dee Carter, that I spoke with, she says that she doesn't know if she's going to vote.
Given that the last few options haven't been that great and nobody really cares about the younger community and generations moving forward. So I don't really know if me voting is going to make a difference.
She says that it feels like the government has not done anything for her to help with her housing costs, that she's not seeing the presidential candidates speak to her in any way as a young person. And so it's not just about which candidate are you going to vote for. It's also about, are you going to show up to vote for one of the candidates? And that's one of the challenges in this election, where there seems to be high voter apathy. Of course, Donald Trump has his base, who is extremely enthusiastic. But then there's the Biden campaign, who is struggling to coalesce their base, and also the middle, the independents. Are they impressed by their choices, or are they going to stay home?
Well, Leanne, thank you so much for joining and sharing your reporting.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
That was politics reporter Leanne Caldwell speaking with my co-host Elahe Azadi. Before we go, here's some news from over the weekend that we're watching today. On Saturday, Israel recovered 4 hostages from Gaza in one of the deadliest raids in the ongoing war. The hostages were rescued from 2 buildings in a refugee camp. But as part of the operation, more than 200 Palestinians were killed, according to the Gaza Health Ministry. It wasn't clear how many were combatants. Palestinian health officials said that at least 400 people were also wounded, and local hospitals scrambled to take them in. Back in Israel, as the 4 rescued hostages landed in Tel Aviv in helicopters, crowds of Israelis were in the streets cheering for them. The Israeli defense minister called the mission, quote, heroic and extraordinary. It was a rare moment of joy and unity in Israel after 8 months of war. But there are cracks in Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's emergency coalition government. If you listened to last Thursday's show, you've heard how Netanyahu has been facing pressure from both far-right and centrist sides of his coalition. On Sunday, centrist leaders, including Benny Gantz, announced that they would resign from the government's war cabinet. Gantz is considered Netanyahu's chief political rival, and he has called on Netanyahu to announce a comprehensive plan for the end of the war. That's it for Post Reports. Thanks for listening. And we just want to take a quick moment to share some exciting news. 2 projects from the Post Reports team just won Peabody Awards. The first was a 3-part series here on Post Reports called Surviving to Graduation. Post journalists and our audio producer, Sabby Robinson, embedded in a school district facing the fallout of gun violence. And they got unbelievable access to students and staff dealing with impossible moments of grief and trauma. The other series that got this award was The Empty Grave of Comrade Bishop, hosted by me and produced by Ted Muldoon and Rennie Svirnovsky. It's our investigation into a 40-year-old mystery around the missing body of Grenada's prime minister and whether the U.S. government had anything to do with it. Our team is so thrilled to be honored with these Peabody Awards. So if you haven't listened to these series yet, you should definitely check them both out. We'll have a link in our show notes. Today's show was produced by Emma Talkoff. It was edited by Ariel Plotnick and mixed by Sam Baer. I'm Martine Powers. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories from the Washington Post.